Alright, so it took me a while to get to this one, mainly because I couldn't get it to work on Steam. But at the request of my patron Wilson Watts, it's time to review The Legend of Heroes Trails of Cold Steel, originally for the PlayStation 3 and Vita, but has since made its way to the PlayStation 4 and, as I mentioned, Steam. Just make sure it works. The game was developed by Nihon Falcom, which I'll admit I am not too familiar with when it comes to their games. Case in point, I didn't even know that The Legend of Heroes was an ongoing series. From what I am to understand, it's a pretty decently popular RPG series in Japan with interesting narrative, characters, and gameplay, and it was good enough to get a direct sequel, so maybe there's something worth chewing on here? Well, let's take a look. The game takes place in the Erebonian Empire, which is riddled to the brim with techmaturgy and cyberpunk themes, as well as a crap ton of political intrigue, we'll get to that later, and your main character is Reen Schwarzer, a student at Thor's Military Academy who is your basic Boy Scout anime protagonist. Not necessarily a criticism, just an observation. Made all the funnier by the fact that he's played by the same guy who voiced Noob Saibot.
You can say that again. I'll have to clear things up with her later.
Death is the coldest ice.
But anyway, he's a part of Class 7, a team comprised of both commoners and nobility, which sets them apart from the rest of the school, and they are sent around Erebonia to conduct quote-unquote field study, completing missions, helping out civilians, stopping a crazed terrorist, and preventing a civil war. Gee, that escalated quickly. Yeah, the game is filled to the brim with your typical anime and cyberpunk tropes, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it does make the plot pretty damn predictable. I guess I'll go ahead and nip that in the bud right now. The overall narrative of this game is really nothing to write home about, but it does get the job done. It's got a few twists and turns here and there, but most of them you can see coming, with the exception of a couple. Special mention to a particular twist at the very end of the game, which I'm not gonna spoil here. Those of you who've played the game, you know what I'm talking about. But like your typical JRPG story, this game tends to focus its narrative around the characters you meet and interact with. Like I said, I can't really say I care for Reen Schwarzer all that much, but I do like Gaius Warzel, who is a pretty mild-mannered foreign exchange student, and I'll admit to relating to Elliot Craig on a personal level. Actually, now that I think about it, this game's cast is pretty damn strong. They're not necessarily the greatest characters I've ever interacted with, but there's not one character that I overtly hate, unlike some other games I can mention. Thankfully, I can say the same thing about this game's artistic direction. The game overall looks really good, especially if you're into anime, and a lot of the battle animations are a treat for the eyes. As for the soundtrack, it's nothing too spectacular, but it certainly gets the job done. Special mention to the battle theme, I love it. But I'm not gonna get through this video without mentioning the elephant in the room, the voice acting. Not saying that the voice acting is necessarily bad, it's actually good, but that's kind of the problem. Like, for some reason, the developers of this game decided to have cutscenes with only certain characters having voiced lines and others just being silent. I don't know why they went in this direction. It's just really distracting, and I kind of don't like it.
I trust you have no objections?
Oh, Your Highness.
See what I mean? It's kind of dumb. But let's go back to the positives for a moment and talk about the gameplay, and admittedly, this is where things get a little interesting, because Trails of Cold Steel doesn't feel all that unique. And by that I mean, it seems to mix elements from the Tales of series, Final Fantasy, and Persona. The whole process of exploring the world, doing battles, and keeping an eye on how much time you have with the whole going to school thing feels very Persona 3. The combat system is turn-based a la Final Fantasy, and the level up system and kind of the minor nuances of the game overall feels very Tales of, particularly Tales of Xillia. This even extends to combat with the tactical link system, where you can do all kinds of different link attacks with your party members, which become more effective when you level up their link levels, kind of like Fire Emblem support system. The level up feature is this orbment system where you place orbs on a grid. You see what I'm getting at here? Now, I'm going to admit right now, this could all be just pure coincidence, or it could be the fact that the developers of this game were highly inspired by these games, but I was going through Trails of Cold Steel, and I could not ignore the blatant similarities. Which is fine, because all the games I listed in comparison to Trails of Cold Steel, I really do love. So if you've already played those games and are looking for something similar, but kind of a mishmash, I guess this game will do the job? But real talk, this is just me being really facetious. Overall, The Legend of Heroes Trails of Cold Steel is a pretty straightforward game that does get the job done. Am I glad I played it? Yeah, I'd say so. Is it enough for me to get invested in the rest of the series? I hate to say it, but not really. If nothing else, this is a game I would recommend to anyone who's looking for something new in regards to the JRPG genre. So, that's gotta count for something.